I need to tell you about what happened to me last week because I still can't believe this is my life right now. I'm standing in my kitchen at 2 in the morning drinking coffee that's way too strong, and my hands are shaking, but not from the caffeine. They're shaking because of her, because of Claire, because of what she asked me tonight, and because I finally understand what it means when people say your whole world can change in a single moment. Let me back up. 3 months ago, I moved into this apartment complex in Portland, and I was just trying to start over after my own messy breakup. Nothing dramatic, just one of those relationships that dies slowly until you're both just going through the motions. Anyway, I'm unpacking boxes in my new place when I hear this crash from next door followed by crying. But not like sad crying, but angry crying, mixed with the sound of things breaking. I stood there frozen with a lamp in my hands, wondering if I should do something or mind my own business. Then I heard a man's voice yelling something I couldn't make out, and a door slamming so hard my walls shook. After that, just silence. Heavy, terrible silence that made my stomach hurt. The next morning I'm taking out my trash, and I see her for the first time. Claire. She's sitting on the stairs outside our building wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, with her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She's got these bright green eyes that look like they haven't slept in days, and she's staring at her phone like it just betrayed her. When she notices me looking, she tries to smile, but it doesn't reach her eyes. And I should have just nodded and kept walking. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the small bruise on her hand that looked fresh, or the way she was holding herself, like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. I asked if she was okay. Stupid question, I know. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her deciding whether to lie or not. She chose honesty. She told me her husband had just moved out the night before, that he'd been having an affair with someone from his office. Someone younger, she said, with this bitter laugh that made my chest tight. Someone who didn't have stretch marks or gray hairs starting to show, or crow's feet around her eyes. Someone who hadn't spent the last 15 years building a life with him. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat down next to her on those steps. We sat there for maybe 20 minutes without talking, and somehow that felt like exactly the right thing to do. When she finally stood up to leave, she touched my shoulder and said thank you. Her hand was warm through my shirt, and I felt that touch for hours afterward. After that, we kept running into each other. At the mailboxes, in the parking lot, at the coffee shop 2 blocks away that we both apparently went to every morning. Each time we'd talk a little longer. I learned she was a teacher at an elementary school, that she loved old movies and couldn't cook to save her life, and that she had this laugh that came out of nowhere and lit up her whole face. I learned that her husband, whose name was David, had left her for a 26-year-old marketing assistant named Brittany. Claire was 42, but she never said it directly, but I could hear the shame in her voice when she talked about it. Like somehow getting older was something she should apologize for. Like the fact that her body had changed over 15 years of marriage was a personal failing. It made me angry in a way I didn't fully understand at first. I started finding excuses to see her more. I'd offer to help carry her groceries. I'd knock on her door with extra food I'd made, claiming I'd cooked too much. We'd end up talking for hours on her couch or mine, about everything and nothing. She told me about the divorce proceedings, and how David wanted to split everything 50-50, like their marriage was just a business transaction being dissolved. She told me about lying awake at night wondering what was wrong with her, why she wasn't enough. And I told her things too, about my own failed relationship, about how I'd felt like I was disappearing in it until I didn't recognize myself anymore, about how starting over was terrifying, but also kind of exciting. We understood each other in this way that felt rare and precious. Somewhere along the way, I fell for her. I didn't mean to. I wasn't looking for it. But it happened anyway, like seasons changing. One day, I was just being a friendly neighbor, and the next day, I was lying in bed at night thinking about the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, or how her eyes got soft when she talked about her students, or how badly I wanted to kiss her. I didn't tell her. How could I? She was going through a divorce. She was vulnerable and hurt, and the last thing she needed was her neighbor complicating things with feelings she probably didn't return. And so I kept it to myself and just tried to be her friend, her good friend, who definitely didn't spend way too much time thinking about her. Then tonight happened. She texted me around 9 asking if I was busy. I wasn't. I'm never busy when it comes to her. She asked if she could come over and talk. 5 minutes later, she was at my door, wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater that made her eyes look even greener. She looked nervous. We sat on my couch, and she told me she'd seen David today. He'd come by to pick up some of his remaining things, and he'd brought Brittany with him. Claire said Brittany was beautiful in that effortless way young women sometimes are. Clear skin, bright eyes, everything still firm and lifted and untouched by time or gravity. This Brittany had stood in the home Claire had decorated and chosen and lived in for over a decade, and she'd smiled at David with this possessive little smile that said, "He's mine now." Claire's voice broke when she told me this part. She said David had looked at Brittany the way he used to look at her 20 years ago, with pride, with desire, with this sense of showing off something valuable. And then he'd looked at Claire, and she could see it in his eyes. The comparison, the judgment, the relief that he'd upgraded. She started crying then. Not dramatic sobbing, just these quiet tears that slid down her cheeks while she tried to keep talking. She said she'd spent the last 3 months trying to convince herself that this wasn't about her, that David's affair was about his own issues and insecurities and midlife crisis. But seeing them together today had shattered that fragile belief. I moved closer to her on the couch. I didn't think I just reached out and wiped away her tears with my thumb. Her skin was so soft. She looked at me with those devastating green eyes, and I felt something shift between us. The air got heavier, charged. Then she asked me the question that's been replaying in my head ever since. She said, "If I were yours, would you be ashamed of me? Would you look at younger women and wish I was still like that? Would you be embarrassed to introduce me to people? Would you wish you could trade me in for a newer model?" My heart stopped. I'm not exaggerating. I felt it actually stop in my chest before starting again with this painful thud. I stared at her, and she stared back at me, and I realized she wasn't asking hypothetically. Yet she was asking because she wanted to know. Because maybe she'd noticed the way I looked at her. Because maybe she felt something too. I should have been careful. I should have thought about timing and vulnerability and all the reasons this was complicated. But I didn't. Instead, I told her the truth. I said, "Claire, if you were mine, I would spend every single day making sure you knew how lucky I was. I would be proud to stand next to you anywhere. I would look at you the way every woman deserves to be looked at, like you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Because you are." She sucked in a breath. Her eyes got wide and shiny with fresh tears, but different tears this time. I kept going, because now that I'd started, I couldn't stop. I told her that David was an idiot. That age hadn't made her less beautiful. It had made her more real and more interesting and more worth knowing. I told her about the first time I heard her laugh. Really laugh, and how it felt like the sun coming out. I told her I'd been trying not to fall for her and failing miserably. The silence after I stopped talking was deafening. She just looked at me with her lips slightly parted and her chest rising and falling fast. Then she leaned in and kissed me. "Okay, So that kiss. I need you to understand that I've been kissed before, obviously, but never like that. Never with that kind of desperate honesty behind it. Claire's hands came up to my face, and she kissed me like she was trying to prove something to herself, or maybe to the universe, or maybe to David, even though he wasn't there. She kissed me like she needed to know she was still desirable, and wanted, and worth choosing. And I kissed her back with everything I had. My hands found her waist, and I pulled her closer until there was no space between us. She made this small sound in the back of her throat that sent electricity down my spine. The kiss deepened, and suddenly we weren't thinking anymore. We were just feeling. Her fingers tangled in my hair, and I could taste the salt from her tears mixed with something sweet, like she'd been drinking tea with honey. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. Her forehead rested against mine, and I could feel her trembling. And I started to say something, but she shook her head. She said, "Please don't talk yet. Just hold me." So I did. I wrapped my arms around her and held her against my chest, and felt her slowly stop shaking. We stayed like that for a long time. Eventually, she pulled back enough to look at me, and her eyes were clearer now. Less haunted. She said she was sorry. I asked her what for, and she said for using me to feel better about herself, for kissing me because she was hurt and angry and needed to feel wanted again. That made me angry, not at her, but at the situation, at David for making her feel like her worth was tied to whether some man desired her. I told her she didn't use me. I told her I'd wanted to kiss her for weeks, and I meant every word I'd said. And I told her she didn't have to apologize for wanting to feel beautiful because she was beautiful, and it killed me that she couldn't see it. She started crying again, but she was smiling too. She said nobody had talked to her like that in years, that David used to in the beginning, but somewhere along the way, she'd become more like a roommate than a wife. Someone he shared bills with and made polite conversation with, but didn't really see anymore. She said she'd felt invisible for so long that she'd started to believe she actually was. I took her hand and squeezed it. I told her I saw her. I saw how she always brought homemade cookies to the elderly couple on the first floor. I saw how she came home exhausted from teaching, but still smiled when kids from her class saw her at the grocery store. I saw how she danced in her kitchen when she thought nobody was watching, and how she fell asleep during movies, but always denied it. I saw her, and she was impossible not to see. She laughed at that last part, that real genuine laugh I loved so much. Then she got quiet and serious again. She asked me what we were doing, what this was, if I really wanted to get involved with someone who was still legally married and going through a messy divorce and had more baggage than an airport. I didn't even hesitate. I told her I wanted whatever she was willing to give me. If she just needed a friend, I'd be her friend. If she wanted more when she was ready, I'd wait. I wasn't going anywhere. I'd meant what I said about falling for her, and I didn't take that back just because the timing was complicated. But she looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, like the concept of someone being patient with her and meeting her where she was didn't compute. She asked why. Why would I want to wait for someone broken? Why would I choose her when I could find someone easier, someone without all these complications? I told her she wasn't broken. I told her she was hurt, and there's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed, but hurt things heal. And I told her I wasn't choosing her because she was easy. I was choosing her because she was worth it. Because when I imagined my future, I wanted her in it. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and that was sitting on this couch with her. She kissed me again then. Softer this time. Sweeter. And like she was saying thank you, and I believe you, and maybe I'm falling for you too all at once. When she pulled back, she was smiling for real. She said okay, just okay. But the way she said it made my heart race. We talked for another hour after that. She told me more about her marriage, and I could hear her processing things as she spoke. She said she'd spent so long trying to be the perfect wife that she'd lost herself. She'd stopped painting, which she used to love. She'd stopped seeing her friends as much. She'd made herself smaller and quieter, thinking that's what David needed, and in the end, he'd left anyway. I asked her what she wanted now, not what David wanted, or what society expected, or what she thought she should want, but what she actually wanted for herself. She thought about it for a while. Then she said she wanted to feel alive again. She wanted to take up space without apologizing. She wanted to be with someone who actually chose her every day, not just legally bound themselves to her and then checked out emotionally. She looked at me when she said that last part, and I knew what she was asking without asking. I told her I'd choose her every day, that choosing her wouldn't be hard. It would be the easiest thing I'd ever done. It was late by then, almost midnight. She said she should probably go. I walked her to my door, and we stood there for a minute just looking at each other. She said thank you for tonight, for listening, for seeing her, for making her feel like maybe she wasn't completely destroyed by what David did. I told her she was never destroyed. Hurt, yes, but not destroyed. That she was still here, still standing, still capable of being loved the right way. She deserved that. She deserved everything. She kissed my cheek and then she was gone back to her apartment next door. I stood in my doorway and watched until her door closed. Then I came back inside, and that's when the reality of everything hit me. I'd just told my recently separated neighbor that I was falling for her. I'd kissed her. She'd kissed me back. This was real and terrifying and amazing all at once. I tried to sleep but couldn't. My mind kept replaying every moment. The way she'd looked at me, the way she had felt in my arms, the possibility of what this could become. So I made coffee, and here I am at 2 a.m, wondering what happens next. Wondering if she's awake too, thinking about me. Wondering if I just made the best decision of my life, or if I'm about to get my heart completely shattered. But even with all that uncertainty, I don't regret it. Not for a second. Okay. So the next morning, I woke up after maybe 2 hours of sleep and immediately checked my phone. Nothing from Claire. I tried not to read into it, but my brain went into overdrive anyway. Maybe she regretted everything. Maybe in the light of day, she realized kissing her neighbor was a terrible idea. Maybe I'd pushed too hard with everything I said. I was spiraling hard when I heard a knock on my door. It was barely 7 a.m. I opened it, and there she was, holding 2 coffee cups and a bag from the bakery down the street. She looked nervous, but she was smiling. She said good morning and asked if I wanted to have breakfast with her. We sat at my small kitchen table and ate croissants that were still warm. The conversation was a little awkward at first, like we were both trying to figure out how to act around each other now. Yet then she reached across the table and took my hand. She said she'd been up all night thinking, that she needed to be honest with me about something. My stomach dropped. Here it comes, I thought. The letdown. The "it was a mistake" speech. But that's not what happened. Instead, she told me that she'd been scared her whole life. Scared of not being good enough. Scared of aging. Scared of being alone. And David leaving had confirmed every fear she'd ever had about herself. But last night, when I looked at her and said those things, something shifted. She said she realized she'd been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't whether David was ashamed of her or whether any man would want her now that she was older. The real question was whether she was ashamed of herself. Well, and she'd been carrying that shame around like a weight for months, maybe years, without even realizing it. But being with me last night, she didn't feel ashamed. She felt seen and wanted and valued for who she actually was, not who she used to be, or who someone wanted her to be. She said that scared her too, but in a different way, in a way that felt like standing at the edge of something new and having to decide whether to jump. I squeezed her hand. I told her she didn't have to decide anything right now. We could take this as slow as she needed. But she shook her head. She said she was tired of being careful, tired of playing it safe and making herself small. She wanted to jump. She wanted to try this with me, whatever this was. I felt like I couldn't breathe in the best way possible. I asked her if she was sure, but if she was really ready for this with the divorce still happening and everything being so messy. She said no, she wasn't sure, and no, she probably wasn't ready. But she was doing it anyway, because for the first time in forever, she actually wanted something for herself. So we agreed to try, to see where this went. She said she needed to keep it quiet for now because of the divorce, and I understood that completely. This was just for us. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who found each other at exactly the right time, figuring it out as we went. That was 4 days ago, and I swear everything feels different now. We've spent every evening together. Sometimes we talk for hours. Sometimes we just sit together watching movies. And last night she fell asleep on my shoulder, and I stayed perfectly still for an hour because I didn't want to wake her. When she finally woke up, she looked at me with sleepy eyes and smiled and said, "This feels right." And it does. It feels so right. It's almost scary. Okay, so I need to tell you what happened today, because this is the part that changes everything. Claire texted me this morning and asked if I could come over to her place. She said it was important. My heart was racing the whole walk from my door to hers, even though it's literally 15 feet. When she opened the door, I could tell something was different. She looked lighter somehow, like she'd put down something heavy she'd been carrying. She pulled me inside, and we sat on her couch. She told me that David had called her last night. But he wanted to finalize the divorce quickly because Brittany was pregnant. I started to say something, but she held up her hand. She said, "Let me finish." She told me that 6 months ago, that news would have destroyed her. It would have confirmed every terrible thing she believed about herself, that she wasn't young enough or pretty enough or good enough, that she'd been replaced by someone better. But when David told her she didn't feel destroyed, she felt free, because suddenly she could see it all so clearly. David didn't leave because she got older. He left because he was chasing some fantasy version of his youth that had nothing to do with her. His leaving wasn't a reflection of her worth. It was a reflection of his own fears and emptiness. She said meeting me had shown her what it felt like to be with someone who actually saw her, and who liked her laugh lines because they came from years of joy, who thought her gray hairs were beautiful, who wanted to know her thoughts and dreams, and didn't just see her as an accessory to his life. She said I'd given her the greatest gift. I'd helped her remember who she was before she'd lost herself trying to be enough for someone who was never going to appreciate her anyway. Then she told me she loved me. Just like that. No build-up, no dramatic pause. She said, "I know it's fast, and I know it's complicated, but I love you, and I needed you to know that." I didn't even think. I pulled her close and kissed her, and told her I loved her too. That I'd probably loved her since that first morning on the stairs, when she chose honesty over polite lies. That watching her rediscover herself over these past few months had been the most beautiful thing I'd ever witnessed. We stayed wrapped up in each other for a long time. Eventually, she pulled back and looked at me with those incredible green eyes. She said she didn't know what the future looked like. The divorce would take time. There would be complications and messy moments and days when her confidence wavered. But she wanted to figure it out with me. She wanted to build something real with someone who chose her, not despite who she was, but because of it. I told her I was all in. Whatever came next, we'd handle it together. So that's where I am now. Sitting in her apartment while she makes us dinner and burns something because she really cannot cook. Yet she's laughing at herself, and I'm watching her move around her kitchen like she owns the space, like she's not apologizing for existing anymore. And I'm thinking about how sometimes the best things come from the worst situations. How her husband leaving her for someone younger led her straight to me. How his shame became her freedom. She just looked over at me and smiled and asked what I'm thinking about. I told her the truth. I'm thinking about how grateful I am that she asked me that question. If I were yours, would you be ashamed of me? Because my answer will always be the same. I could never be ashamed of her. I'm proud of her, and I always will be.